We often think we already know how a great story ends, especially one that has been told thousands of times. But what if the parts we're most confident about are actually the deepest mysteries of all? Tonight, we're not going to talk about the glory of her throne. Instead, we'll step into a single room, a single moment, one that was meant to be an epic conclusion, but instead became an eternal question. 30 BCE, Alexandria. A city where ambition and beauty collided with an unavoidable fate. And in the middle of the collapse, with the sound of Roman boots drawing closer, the last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, withdrew into her private residence. She was a woman who defined power, a woman who brought the two most powerful men in the world to their knees. But in those final days, she was simply a mother, a lover who had lost everything. Cornered. This door, her chamber door, it became the final line between Egypt's pride and Rome's conquest. Outside, there was nothing left but desperation. Inside, it is said, there was only one decision that could preserve the dignity of a queen. Behind that door, she was accompanied by her two most loyal attendants, Eros and Charmian. And then, complete silence fell, like a heavy layer of dust settling over everything. When the Roman general, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, finally ordered the door to be opened, what he found was an anomaly, a scene far too peaceful for a tragedy. The two attendants lay still, motionless, and at the center of the room, on her ceremonial bed, lay the queen, Cleopatra. She was already dead. There were no screams, no signs of struggle, and most unsettling of all, there was no blood. Her body lay perfectly arranged, adorned with royal garments and her crown, too composed, too deliberate, as if someone had carefully staged her death, erasing every trace of chaos and leaving behind a final creation, cold, elegant, and lethal. History records it as suicide, but inside that locked chamber, there were no living witnesses, only silence. And here is the detail that still sends a chill through us today. No one truly saw the last queen of Egypt die. Her death, as beautiful and as tragic as her life, was a conclusion drawn too quickly by the victors of the war. This is what history calls death by snake venom. 2 small bites, quick, silent. But wait a moment. The Roman side, led by Octavian, claimed that the queen died from the bite of an asp, smuggled into her chambers inside a basket of figs, a story that was poetic, symbolic, and very easy to accept. But the evidence left behind only deepened the mystery. In Egyptian tradition, the asp was a sacred symbol, one that connected the queen to the gods themselves. Dying this way would ensure Cleopatra remained divine, not a captive of Rome. But, quick fact, did you know? An ancient toxicology expert, Nicander of Colophon, once wrote that death by asp bite was slow, painful, and often accompanied by violent vomiting, far from the peaceful image found in the queen's chamber. The ancient historical manuscript, rarely discussed, records the presence of 2 small puncture marks, nearly invisible on the queen's arm, marks that were later dismissed by Roman soldiers, wounds that may not have been caused by fangs, but by a fine needle. Plutarch, the Roman historian, closer to the events themselves, acknowledged this uncertainty with a brief admission, quote, "No one knows for certain, for she died in profound silence." That mystery, that silence. Did Cleopatra truly choose a poetic ending, or was that locked chamber nothing more than a carefully constructed stage designed to conceal a cold execution, a ruthless intervention to ensure the queen would never again become a political threat to the newly rising Roman Empire? We will examine the motivations of the victor, Octavian, and trace the psychology hidden behind the downfall of a powerful woman and the reason why she had to die. Let's step away from the silence of that death chamber for a moment and move outward into the brutal arena of political warfare. Because more often than not, the answer to a mystery is not found in the victim, but in the one who benefited most from their death. We've seen the final moment, her death too, carefully arranged inside a locked chamber. But to understand why that death had to happen and why it was wrapped in mystery, we need to step back. We need to understand the arena in which this queen was fighting. Cleopatra was not a romantic rumor whispered through history. She was the last ruler of the great Ptolemaic dynasty, an ancient legacy founded by the generals of Alexander the Great. She held control over Egypt, and Egypt at that time was not just a piece of land, it was the breadbasket of the world. For Rome, controlling Egypt meant controlling the food supply that sustained millions of its citizens. Whoever controlled Alexandria controlled the price of bread in Rome. Egypt was the ultimate prize, and Cleopatra was the last barrier standing in the way. Now imagine her position, a queen inheriting an empire that was old and fragile, surrounded by disloyal advisors and her own siblings fighting her for the throne. She was a political survivor, constantly dancing on the edge of a blade. Across the sea, a new power was rising, Rome, an unmatched machine of war and administration, led by a succession of ambitious men: Julius Caesar, Pompey, Marcus Antonius, and finally Octavian. Cleopatra stood face to face with this giant, and her survival strategy? She did not use the sword, she used diplomacy, allure, and a ruthless intelligence. She did not try to defeat Rome, she tried to tame it, by making herself inseparable from its power. We often hear about her beauty, but that narrative is a Roman distortion. Cleopatra was a linguist. She could speak 8 languages, including ancient Egyptian, something her Greek ancestors never bothered to learn. She was a highly skilled politician. She presented herself to the Egyptian people not as a foreign ruler, but as the reincarnation of Isis, the goddess of life and prosperity. She understood the power of image. She shaped her own propaganda, engraving her likeness on Egyptian coins with a strong nose and a firm jaw, far removed from the fragile image we're often shown in Hollywood films. She defined soft power thousands of years before the term ever existed. And this is where we arrive at the heart of the issue, especially for those of us who understand what it means to navigate a male-dominated workplace. Cleopatra was a powerful woman in a world that never forgave powerful women. Julius Caesar could pursue limitless ambition. Marcus Antonius could divorce his Roman wife and rule half the known world. That was considered normal. But when Cleopatra formed alliances with these men, not as a mistress but as an equal partner, she was branded a monster. This is the question that lingers. Why was Cleopatra feared more than any male ruler of her time? The answer lies buried in the archives of Rome. Roman archives, written by her rivals, portrayed the Queen of Egypt as a deadly siren, a foreign manipulator who used sex appeal to weaken Roman heroes. This was propaganda, imperial-scale character assassination. On the other hand, Egyptian sources praised her as a savior, a queen fighting to preserve their sovereignty. The unavoidable truth is this: history is always written by the victors. Rome could not allow Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra to prevail, not only because of their military threat, but because of what they represented: a new Eastern empire led by an intelligent, ambitious queen, threatening to shift the center of global power from Rome to Alexandria. The world admired her, but her power made her dangerous. Through political intelligence alone, Cleopatra became a symbol of a threat that had to be eliminated. And that brings us back to the locked chamber. Who controlled the narrative of her life and her death? Was the peaceful ending preserved by Rome the story they needed to cleanse themselves of accusations of political murder? In the next chapter, we will dissect the three main theories behind that locked room: poetic suicide, political assassination, and a darker hypothesis, one involving a physician and a vial of poison far more sophisticated than snake venom. The context is set. The queen has been criminalized. Now, let us move away from global politics and into microscopic details that may finally expose a brutal truth. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with a blade. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a smile, promises of protection, and the word ally, spoken in a way that sounds safe. Cleopatra understood that too well. At this stage of her life, Cleopatra was no longer fighting armies. She was fighting time, narrative, and fears that could not be defeated with force. The world around her began to close in, not because she had lost her intelligence, but because every move she made was now shaped by people who wanted a clean, convenient ending for her story. And beneath all of this lies a truth rarely discussed. Cleopatra didn't just lose politically, she was broken psychologically. At first, everything looked like a familiar game of diplomacy. Cleopatra had been trained for it since her teenage years: negotiation, subtle manipulation, reading expressions before words were ever spoken. But this time, it was different. The final alliance she built was no longer just a survival strategy. It was the last gamble of a woman who understood that the world would never forgive her for appearing weak. And when that alliance collapsed, it wasn't only a kingdom that fell. What shattered was the illusion that love and politics could exist side by side. In Rome, propaganda moving faster than armies, Cleopatra's name was no longer spoken as that of a queen. She was labeled a moral threat, a foreign woman, dangerous, seductive, corrupting. Octavian didn't need to defeat Cleopatra on the battlefield. He only needed to destroy her image, and he did it flawlessly. Cleopatra was portrayed as a woman who enslaved Rome's most powerful men with her beauty, as a symbol of Eastern decadence, as a threat to Roman family values, discipline, and authority. But the truth was far simpler and far more cruel. Cleopatra was a woman brave enough to play at a table that was never designed for her. For Cleopatra, love was never a romantic escape. It was a language of power. But in the hands of her enemies, that love was distorted. Every personal relationship became proof that she was unfit to rule, that she was too emotional, too feminine, too dangerous to be allowed any real freedom. And the cruelest part, she couldn't defend herself without appearing guilty. Every attempt at explanation only strengthened the narrative that she was manipulative. Every moment of silence was taken as an admission. This is a form of psychological violence rarely discussed in history, when a woman is attacked not for what she does, but for how the world chooses to interpret her body and her emotions. Cleopatra knew this. She read the reports, she heard the rumors, she understood that she had been reduced to a symbol, not a human being. And symbols are never given the chance to explain themselves. Turned into a moral threat. Rome was never afraid of Cleopatra as a general. Rome was afraid of Cleopatra as a story, because stories are more dangerous than swords. If Cleopatra had been kept alive and taken to Rome, she would not have been executed. She would have been displayed as a trophy, as a warning, as a message to the world that no woman, no matter how intelligent, was allowed to cross the boundaries set by the empire. Cleopatra's greatest threat was never death. It was public humiliation. Imagine it, the Queen of Egypt, heir to an ancient dynasty, forced to walk through Roman streets, watched by crowds already taught to see her as a monster. History often skips over this detail, but for Cleopatra, it was a real and haunting possibility. She was not afraid to die. She was afraid of losing the last thing she still controlled, her dignity. Losing power is never just about a throne. It is the loss of identity. From a young age, Cleopatra was taught one thing above all else. She existed to rule. Now, one by one, the pillars of her life began to collapse. Armies turned away. Allies disappeared. Cities that once pledged loyalty closed their gates, and what remained was silence. In historical records, there is no therapy, no safe space, no room for a queen to admit that she was afraid. Cleopatra was alone with her thoughts, and the mind can be the most ruthless enemy of all. She was forced to choose between two forms of destruction: to live as a symbol of humiliation, or to die with full control over her own narrative. And this is where the story turns dark. The official version claims Cleopatra died from the bite of a venomous snake, an asp, a royal symbol, a poetic death. Too poetic. The problem is, there is no consistent medical evidence, no clearly documented bite marks, no direct eyewitnesses, no formal examination of the queen's body. All we are left with is a neat story. And history prefers neat stories. But modern historians have begun to hesitate. What kind of snake kills that quickly without leaving clear traces? Why did the two attendants who were with her die in different ways? Why are there no detailed records describing Cleopatra's physical condition? But the deeper historians examined the evidence, the less sense it made. Something about this death was too convenient, too fast, too clean, too perfectly aligned with Rome's political needs. A death without witnesses. The most disturbing part isn't how Cleopatra died, it's who wasn't there. There were no independent witnesses, no medical records, no genuine attempt to save her. The body of a queen, a global symbol, was handled without transparency. Imagine if this happened today: an international scandal, investigations, global outrage. But at that time, history was written by the victors, and victors don't need details. They only need an ending. The final solitude. Cleopatra spent her final days in a closed room, guarded, observed, yet emotionally, completely alone. There were no more negotiations, no more political chess games. What remained was the final decision of a woman who understood that the world would offer her no mercy. Did she take her own life? Was she poisoned? Was her death assisted? History gives us no clear answer, and perhaps that was intentional, because mystery is what makes this story eternal. Outside that room, the world moved on. Rome was preparing to celebrate its victory. A new narrative was already being written. Inside, however, a woman stood at the edge of a decision no one should ever have to face alone. Cleopatra, admired by the world, feared by politics, and ultimately abandoned by the system that once benefited from her. And when that door closed for the final time, what died was not only a queen. What died was history's last chance to be completely honest.
The turning point did not arrive gently. It gave history no time to breathe. It came fast, and it came brutal. Cleopatra lost. Rome won. And almost instantly, a queen who had shaped the course of the Mediterranean world for over 2 decades vanished from the stage of history. There was no final speech, no open resistance, no grand spectacle for the public to witness. Only silence. And in history, silence is rarely a sign of peace. More often, it's a sign that something was buried far too quickly.
Before the fall, let's pause for a moment and remember who Cleopatra was before this point. She was not a peripheral figure. She was not a footnote. Cleopatra was the political center of gravity in the Eastern Mediterranean. Her name alone was enough to unsettle Roman senators. Her decisions shaped trade, alliances, and wars. She was feared, desired, taken seriously, not because of her beauty, but because of her mind. She spoke multiple languages. She understood economics, propaganda, symbolism, and mass psychology. She knew when to be gentle and when to be ruthless. For years, Cleopatra stood shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful men in the world and never asked permission to be there. That is why her fall had to be swift. Now compare that to what remained. A woman, alone, inside a closed room. No army, no allies, no political future. No envoys waiting for her command. No strategic maps spread before her. No strategic options left. What remained was only time, and a decision that could not be undone. This was the cruelest contrast of Cleopatra's life, and perhaps in the entire history of power. How could a ruler of the world be reduced to silence inside a single room? This is the moment that makes modern historians pause and question. Why was her death announced so quickly? There was no delay, no investigation, no period of uncertainty. It was as if everyone already knew how this story was supposed to end, even before it truly had. And just like that, the most powerful woman of her era was gone. The line feels almost mechanical, too neat, too efficient. History rarely moves this fast, unless someone benefits greatly from the silence. Who benefited from Cleopatra's silence? This question continues to haunt us. If Cleopatra had lived, she could have spoken. She could have told her version of the story. She could have dismantled propaganda. She could have become a symbol of resistance, even in defeat. But a dead Cleopatra never argued back, never corrected the record, never explained herself, and the world heard only one voice, the voice of the victors. In politics, this is not an accident, it is strategy. Cleopatra's silence was Rome's final victory. Solitude as a final weapon. Cleopatra may have realized one bitter truth. Her body no longer held political power, but her death still might. In a world determined to control her even after defeat, that final decision may have been the last space of freedom she had left. Not the freedom to live, but the freedom to avoid humiliation. It is a deeply human dilemma, and a deeply female one. When every exit is closed by the system, even death can become a quiet form of resistance. Imagine that room, sealed, almost silent, light slipping in slowly through a narrow opening. No eyewitness recorded the moments, second by second. No final words were ever heard. What we have is only a brief report and countless assumptions. History gives us no access to her thoughts in that moment. Was she afraid? Was she angry? Was she exhausted? Or perhaps she simply wanted it all to stop. Women, power, and an ending that was never chosen. There is an uncomfortable pattern here. Men who lose in history are often allowed to die as martyrs. Women who lose are more often turned into warnings. Cleopatra was not given the space to lose with dignity. She had to be ended, framed, controlled, even in death. And that is why her story never feels truly finished. There is a gap, a pause, something missing. The silence that was too loud. Cleopatra disappeared from the stage of history, yet the silence she left behind was anything but quiet. It provoked questions. It refused simple explanations. It rejected a neat ending. And perhaps that is her most honest legacy. Not the story of a snake, not a romantic legend, but the reality that the most powerful woman of her era was never truly given the chance to tell the ending of her own life. Toward the final chapter, history tried to close Cleopatra's book quickly, but some stories refuse to stay quiet. Because when a woman is forced to disappear, what remains is not only mystery, but echo. And in the final chapter, we will ask the most uncomfortable question of all. Did Cleopatra truly lose, or did she claim the last control over how the world would remember her? When a queen became a question. The world did not stop when Cleopatra died. Instead, it changed direction. There was no international mourning, no pause for reflection. The wheel of history kept turning forward, cold and efficient, as if a woman who once shaped half of the Mediterranean had been nothing more than a brief disturbance, now quietly removed. And yet, her impact never truly disappeared. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt was never the same. It did not simply lose a queen. Egypt lost its final sovereignty. A land that had been ruled for thousands of years by pharaohs, by bloodlines, sacred symbols, and ritual authority, was now reduced to a province, not an ally, not a partner, but a possession. Rome, on the other hand, secured something far greater than a military victory. It secured a global narrative that true power is not won only on the battlefield, but on the pages of history. Cleopatra, once in control of the East's economy, diplomacy, and symbols of power, was slowly stripped away, reduced, simplified, from a ruler into a myth. The most dangerous transformation. This may have been Cleopatra's greatest defeat, not her death, but how she was remembered. History did not preserve her as a stateswoman, not as a strategist, not as a multilingual ruler who understood the world better than many of her rivals. Instead, she was remembered as a story, as drama, as a romantic tragedy, as a woman who was too ambitious. And myth is an incredibly effective tool, because myth cannot defend itself. A noble-looking ending. The version we've learned since childhood sounds neat. Cleopatra chose suicide. She refused humiliation. She died for honor. This version gives us a comfortable emotional closure. It turns defeat into bravery. It turns destruction into choice. And for Rome, this version was perfect. No murder, no scandal, no questions about legitimacy. Just a foreign queen who chose to end her own life. The story ends, the problem disappears. Why this story never rests. There is a reason Cleopatra's story keeps returning. In books, in films, in conversations that never fully end. Because at its core lies a question we still haven't answered. What happens when a woman becomes too powerful within a system that was never designed for her? Is she allowed to live, or is she rewritten until her power no longer feels threatening? Cleopatra may have lost militarily, but her greatest threat emerged after her death. The threat that one day the world would stop seeing her as a legend and begin seeing her as a victim. Did Cleopatra choose death, or was she only given the illusion of choice? Did she control the end of her life, or did history control how that ending was told? And if her story was rewritten, what else was erased along with her? A legacy that could not be buried. Cleopatra did not leave behind an independent kingdom. She left no powerful heir. She left no victory. But she left something far more difficult to destroy: doubt toward the official story. Each time we question how her life ended, we refuse to accept a version handed to us without evidence. And each time we speak of her as a human being, not a symbol, we revive the very power that history tried to erase. Cleopatra may have died alone, but she never truly disappeared. She lives in the gaps of history, between fact and propaganda, between what was recorded and what was deliberately forgotten. And perhaps that was her final victory, not in life, not in politics, but in the reality that 2,000 years later, we are still asking, did Cleopatra truly lose, or was she simply too dangerous to be told honestly? That night, Alexandria still stood. The sea kept breathing. The stars continued to burn. There was no earthquake, no cosmic sign, no world collapsing. Just one woman, who had once held the fate of a kingdom, stopping her breath, with no true witness to see her leave. History calls it a noble ending, a poetic one, an ending worthy of a queen. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes, it simply means someone was never given the chance to speak again. There was no medical report, no detailed record, no official questioning, just one story, immediately accepted by the world because the world needed it to be finished. Cleopatra was dead, Rome had won, and the empire moved forward without the shadow of the past. Too fast, too clean. Imagine if Cleopatra had lived one more day. Just one day. Enough time to speak, enough time to write, enough to disrupt the narrative. But that day never came, and history never explained why. We were given a story about a snake, about choice, about honor. But we were never given proof, because perhaps truth was never the goal. What was needed was a safe ending, an ending that wouldn't invite sympathy, an ending that wouldn't create a martyr, an ending that turned a powerful woman into a legend, not a threat. Cleopatra did not lose on the battlefield. She lost in a silent room, where power no longer needed swords, only pens. And that pen was not in her hand. 2,000 years later, we still remember her name, not because of how she died, but because something about her death never feels finished. There is a pause, a gap, something deliberately left empty. Perhaps Cleopatra chose death, or perhaps she was made to disappear elegantly. History gives us no answer, and maybe that is the most honest part of all. Because when a woman becomes too powerful, the world rarely allows her to write the ending of her own story. She is remembered, she is discussed, she is turned into myth, but her voice never returns. And in that silence, the question remains alive. Did Cleopatra choose death, or did history choose silence?